first. Thanks, Corey. We are starting our first Motivation Monday of this academic year, and let's get started. So if you have any questions at any point, feel free to either tag it on Twitter, or you can also post them in the chat, and we will ask them of the panelists. And yeah, hi. So I am Arun. I am a third-year PhD student at the University of Pittsburgh. My research is in the space of adaptive education technologies, kind of several things which are very different from the rest of the SIG, but I do use some ideas from cognitive psychology, for example, sometimes once in a while to build these technologies. And so, yeah, and definitely the event wouldn't have been possible without help from people who have already worked in this SIG for a while, like Corey, Maggie, and then also help from Shea and Elise. So yeah, this entire setup was not wouldn't have been possible without them. And so let's go ahead and get started with introducing our panelists today and the topic. So today we're going to talk about navigating through grad school, and we have an excellent group of panelists here who have experience from it's a spectrum of experience. They have seen different things about grad school, and all of you can actually feel free to ask any kind of questions that you may have of them, and think of this as an open space. We might also pause recording at some point. So yeah, whenever it feels more comfortable, if whatever makes you feel comfortable, you can. So today we will be talking about all these travails and challenges of grad school, also the fun side of things, and how you actually navigate through it and come out successful from the other side. So yeah, and let me go ahead and start introducing the panelists for today. So the first panelist for today is Nikki. I know Nikki from the previous lab that I was working with her, and she started as a postdoc right when I left the lab, but her research is very related to the space of like motivation, and also I'm also going to read the script. Sorry. Yeah. So Nikki is currently a postdoc associate at the Learning Research Development Center, which is one of the oldest research centers that have experiment and like observe changes in like learning and things like that. And she also previously worked at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. She has a PhD in learning sciences, and her research focuses on like designing and studying context-sensitive interventions in collaborative settings, and also working on analytic methods, social regulation of learning framework. And she's currently investigating on dyadic differences that impact collaborative learning, examining emotional regulation. So like very related to a lot of things, a lot of topics in the SIG, and strategies in project-based learning environment, creating a theoretical model. And recently it's been a year, but even then, her dissertation, Building from the Inside Out, it's one of the a framework that she developed from ground up. And I remember her telling like she had like a very large data set, was something around 200K or more than that data set, which she manually coded and built this framework. And she got a dissertation award for that from the Division 15 of the APA Association. Welcome, Nikki. Also, before, once again, I didn't see this message, but okay, I'll just quickly introduce the next panelist. So we have Andrew as the next panelist. He's a fifth-year doctoral candidate in the educational psychology program at the Ohio State University. His research interests include academic motivation, self-regulated learning of first-generation college students who have transferred from community colleges into four-year universities. He also studies achievement and retention among historically underrepresented students in STEM fields, academic integrity among secondary and post-secondary students, and antecedents to violence perpetuated against educators in K-12 contexts. He has been the independent instructor for DLC's flagship course, ESEPSY 1259, for 2.5 years. He's a reviewer for the Journal of Psychoeducational Assessment. It's a quantitative independent consultant for Rutgers University. He is, yeah, and a member of the APA Division 15, graduate student seminar committee, a member of the AERA Motivation. And yes, he's a very active member of this SIG. And he was also a nominee for the 2019 Educational Studies Teaching Associates TA of the Year Award, and winner of the 2020 AERA Studying and Self-Regulated Learning Special Interest Group Graduate Student Research Award. So welcome, Andrew. Yeah, and we are also sharing some of these notable works from the authors. And moving on to the next panelist, Elise. She's a fourth-year doctoral student in the educational psychology at Ohio State University. Her research interests include motivation and engagement or disengagement processes, particularly for secondary students. She also recently conducted a research day at the University of Zurich to study motivation and willpower in college students. She's a member of the APA Division 15 and the junior co-chair of AERA Motivation 6. So again, yes, she's a very active member of this group, and she has a lot of experience. Yeah, and there's a lot we can learn from her. She is interested in achievement goal theory and situated expectancy value theory, identifying points of possible intervention to prevent students' adoption of performance avoidance goals and or higher cost perceptions. Recently, she also has begun working on implicit beliefs of willpower and how these beliefs may impact students' persistence and achievement outcomes. And the final panelist for today is Destini Braxton. She is a doctoral student at Virginia Commonwealth University School of Education in the education psychology track. She received her master's degree in special education and undergraduate degree in psychology, also from Virginia Commonwealth. She's currently a special education math teacher at middle school in Richmond. Her research interests focus on the development of academic identity and teacher-student relationships and effects it has on motivation and academic performance in mathematics. Another area of interest is underrepresented racial communities, academic performances, and motivation in mathematics with a focus on students with learning disabilities. Destini's area of research have stemmed from her personal experiences as both a minority student in education and a teacher, where 100% of the student population receives free lunch in an urban environment. She is interested in conducting research that brings to forefront how race, ethnicity, and culture can affect academic identity, teacher-student relationships, and motivation, the implications of these relations for fostering equity and inclusion in special education. At Virginia Commonwealth, she was Community Service Chair and Treasurer of Epsilon Zeta Chapter of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Inc. and gained leadership experience. I briefly know about Destini, who participates in a lot of these writing groups and other events. So she's also a very active member of the SIG. So yeah, let's welcome all the panelists. And I think Maggie had a quick announcement to make, and so I will let her speak right now.
Sure, yeah, sorry, I'm just getting my screen situated. But welcome everyone, we're really excited. I'm Maggie. I'm another graduate student committee member of the Motivation SIG. Before we get started, on behalf of the graduate student committee, we wanted to take a moment to have a couple of acknowledgements. We wanted to take a moment to recognize that this month we're celebrating Latinx or Hispanic Heritage Month. The Graduate Student Committee recognizes, appreciates, and celebrates all Latinx individuals who have contributed and continue to contribute to educational scholarship. Additionally, we wanted to take this moment to bring attention to some anti-trans gender policies being enacted across the United States, including in Virginia, where many of a few of us on the panel and the Graduate Student Committee live, where Virginia And Virginia is having an open 30-day comment period starting September 26th, today, for Governor Youngkin's latest anti-trans policy that requires students to use the bathroom that matches the sex assigned to them at birth, in addition to making it extremely difficult for them to change their names and gender at schools. And so the Graduate Student Committee encourages our participants to share your comments during this comment period using the link that we'll drop in the chat in just a second. And also just reach out to your local government officials if this is happening in the state that you live, and demand change, and check that you're registered to vote. Thanks, everybody, and I'll hand it back to Arun.
Thanks, Maggie. So let's move on. So today's discussion, we will follow like 3 sections. One where we will have some questions for the panelists, and we will have a brief discussion, followed by, I think Elise also has a few thoughts that she would like to share of her own. So we will also have some within panelist discussion, and then we will have some space for audience questions, like whatever you post in the chat, or whatever you might have posted on Twitter at this point. And we hope that you actually keep posting on Twitter at this point as the event progresses. And then we will also, at the end, I also have planned to post your takeaways as notes in a page, and I will share the link at some point. But after like a certain point, you might feel like you have a lot of things that you actually gained from the discussion today, and something that you would like to note as a takeaway from today's meeting. And we might actually post all your contributions on our Twitter page at the end of the event. So yeah, and so let's get started now. So this is an open question to all panelists. We can also specifically, I can call out names, but instead I think I will just put it as an open question. And let's see if, okay. So the first question that we have is, how did you choose your PhD research topics? And what factors should graduate students consider when selecting a topic? Example, like factors such as career path, timelines, scope, etc.
I think Andrew and I unmuted at the exact same time. I was waiting him out. I thought he would have something to say before me.
I always speak first in our classes. She knows this.
I know. I was waiting for it. In any event, I think this is something that I think I talked to a lot of faculty about early on. And I think the piece of advice that I got over and over again that I would also echo is that you need to make sure it's something that you're passionate about and interested in, because you are not going to get through your candidacy, let alone your dissertation. I'm just starting my dissertation, but just made it through candidacy, if you don't care about your topic. So while it's important to think about where you're going with your career and things like that, it's more important to ensure that it's something that you're interested in. One little caveat to that I will say is sometimes intervention work can be very challenging at the dissertation level. So that's something that you might delay a little bit, although you can, of course, get involved with other people's intervention projects. But that's just one thing that I've been slightly warned against for the dissertation, just because it can be very challenging as an individual kind of going through that. But again, most importantly, make sure it's something that you love, something that you're interested in for the long haul.
So I agree with that completely. And what I was going to say, when I first unmuted, was that how I came to my topic of first generation college student motivation is I actually examined my own academic journey, because I am a first generation college student, and I look at community college matriculation pathways. I am a graduate of a community college. So I used my own experiences and what I didn't understand about my own experiences to inform my interest, what I was looking at. And it happened to be something that wasn't well studied in the literature. But I'd also encourage everyone to take care of with what classes you're taking. Something might inspire you, right? It's okay to walk in the door not having a clue what you want to do. And if something strikes you as interesting, inspiration can come from pretty much anywhere. I would say, as far as factors to consider or not consider, I would strongly recommend everybody to not just think about what your advisor does. Okay, make sure that it's your own thing. If it happens to be something that you do work on regularly with folks you work with, delightful. But if you want to strike your own course, that is perfectly fine. Because I mean, the research that I'm doing for my dissertation, no faculty at Ohio State does that particular work. It's totally fine. And in fact, I would say any faculty worth their salt would support that. And even though it's not an exact match, would carry you forward.
I would also, to piggyback off of what Andrew said about, or sorry, maybe it was Elise, about being passionate about the topic that you're choosing. I chose my topic, which is again on student emotion and teacher and student relationship, because I am a math teacher, and I just think that sitting in so many professional developments about teacher or how to build relationships takes more to, you have to understand more than just teachers need to care. Like there's more in the background that needs to happen for these relationships to thrive. And again, that's something that I was just very passionate about. And like Andrew said, my research interests do not align with my advisors. And that is okay. And my advisor told me that that was okay. And she's even more excited that I'm doing something in the program that nobody else in our program is researching. And she's just very interested and excited based on my passion and excitement for this topic. So it feels just really good, you know, being different. And again, not doing something because other people in my program are doing it. Like I was okay with standing out and exploring a different topic in the program.
And I'll second, third, and fourth some of these things. Kind of what Andrew was saying is my advisor told me research is me search. You know, we connect to it on first. I mean, there's a reason we do the things that we do, and there's a reason we're passionate about those. I always recommend that you don't get too close to it and you don't overgeneralize your own experiences. I know I struggle with that because I too was a math teacher. I will say, and I always make this joke, but it's going to fall flat here because we all do emotions and motivation. But I'm like, I always recommend that people do a dissertation on emotions because, you know, at the end of the day, you're like, how am I going to get through this? Well, I'm reading all about it. This is how. And then, I mean, and again, I can't emphasize enough about you have something that you're passionate about. But I want to add a caveat to that. A good dissertation is a done dissertation. And when you're really passionate about it and when you're doing something that no one else has done, sometimes, I know for me, I'm not going to overgeneralize, I would have this tendency to get caught up in it and want to change everything and make, you know, this huge impact and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, and so I was the first one in my school to do a 3-article dissertation and all this kind of stuff. But why did I do 3? Like I could have just done 1 and been done, have a lot fewer gray hairs and things like that. Like, so to me, just kind of keeping that scope and remember when you're doing your dissertation, that's also when you're on the job market, when you're all these things. And so you're like, oh, I'll be done with classes, but you'll have like 3 jobs going on at the same time. So just kind of keep that in mind, you know, and if this is the first time you're hearing it, it will not be the last.
And I want to add one thing too, because I faced this myself in picking a research topic in the actual doing of the work, which I'm in a similar place with Elise. I'm in the midst of dissertating now. Try to avoid letting your expertise with methodology dictate what questions you ask and how you approach your research? Because there's a tendency I've heard from some other folks is that, well, I'm comfortable with this analytic technique, and therefore this is what I'm going to do. And it affects and perhaps limits your ability to do ask certain kind of questions and pursue different topics of interest. And so be free to like ask you like what you want to really do. And again, the passionate point of it, but there are methodology classes. There's ways that you can learn what you have to learn in a way, I guess. If you want to do a mixed method study, but you've never considered yourself much of a qualitative person, there's a way where you can develop that skill. Don't be afraid to pursue that. Pursue what you would think best answers your question and that interests you.
Okay, I really like the answers, and yeah, I have some personal takeaways from the message, but yeah, so let's see if the second question kind of connects well with that. So like, yes, some of you did mention that it's not necessary that your research has to match or align with what your faculty member is doing, for example, your advisor. So this question is like in that direction. So like faculty members at various stages of their careers and projects might have like different approaches. What are some good strategies of working with more hands-off professors? So like people who are like early on in their career, the advisors that they're working with, they might be more hands-on versus, there might be professors who are like more hands-off because now they are like pretty senior and you're just like another grad student who is joining their lab now or something like that. So. Oh, and also in addition, like, do you have any advice for working with faculty who has like a lot of projects going on and those who might not have as many projects?
I'll say I hope that your advisors do eventually, like that whole ZPD scaffolding fading over time. I hope by the end of it, you are independent and you are able to be a mentor for more junior members of the faculty. But I think it is difficult. I've always been a big proponent of, let me preface and say I had 4 advisors in grad school for a variety of reasons. But I'm a big proponent of seeking out what you need. And so when my advisor got like 8 or 9 students one year and was doing some other stuff, I really relied heavily on my other mentors. When I needed more, qualitative people, I would seek out those kind of things, kind of like Andrew said. And so to me, it's one of those like really building a network and helping you get. So if you have someone who's like really hands off and you need, sometimes you don't even know what you need, like you don't know what you don't know kind of thing. I would really suggest building those mentorships, and it's going to start by people that you take classes with and things like that. Because you also need other people on your dissertation committee. Like that's the other thing, is it's not just your advisor. You have to build comps of 3 and dissertation of 5. That's what mine was. And you want those to be people who know you and your work well by the end of your, grad school. So this shouldn't be like a stranger or just some random person that you asked. And so to me, it's about developing relationships with peers or with the faculty, because these are going to be your peers one day, when you're done. And so that's my thing is, you'll never get everything you need from your advisor. I hope that they are most of what you need, but I really suggest seeking out, especially for me, it was important to find women. None of my supervisors until this year have been female. And that was different. That was really important for me. And so again, all the different areas of your identity, any need of yours that's not being met, I suggest seeking out and finding those people to help fill those needs.
Yeah, I actually want to echo a lot of what Nikki just said. I think it's so important to yeah, kind of go where you need to go when you need to go there. And it's okay to not just work with your advisor. I know Andrew and I both at Ohio State work with a variety of faculty members in our department, and have published with different people, done conference papers with different people. But also, if you're at a smaller university, you can also reach out to people at other universities as well, whether those are other grad students that you've met through conferences. I see Nikki said that at the same time I did in the chat. It's very important to make those connections too, especially if you have a smaller faculty. It can be harder to find those other opportunities, but you can definitely connect with other grad students, especially, I know, just a little selfishly, the Mote SIG biased, perspective here. The Mote SIG is a really great and supportive environment. I know a lot of us went to conference for the first time this last year and made a lot of really great connections, and have already started building on those or started talking about projects. So that's definitely something you can do. And another thing, just kind of in terms of faculty at different stages, we were just joking about this before we started, but the answer to so many things in education is it depends. It's going to depend a lot on the person, and you'll learn a little bit how to work with different faculty over time. There are some faculty that want you to harass them with follow-up emails, so that they get back to you on that manuscript or that conference proposal. There are others that are going to want to sit and go over it with you in a meeting. You kind of will learn this as you get to know them a bit better, and learn how to work with different faculty. But yes, definitely don't feel like you have to limit yourself to just working with your advisor, and reach out across all those boundaries.
I want to just say, if assuming that you do want to be in, like, let's say you need to work with your advisor, it's something that involves your advisor, but your advisor is this hands-off person, perhaps more hands-off than you'd care to have. It's a little uncomfortable for you, or it's not working out for you. I'd recommend to everybody to advocate for yourself. Be very vocal, and communicate your needs. Now, faculty may not always be able to meet those needs. They're people too, but you need to advocate for yourself as much as you can. And so if you find yourself in a situation where just going around to different professors out, other than just your advisor, is not feasible or just not possible in that moment, do not be afraid to advocate for yourself with your advisor. To try to, they can work with you to try to meet your needs. So that would be my only other additional advice to add on to what's already been said, is to be sure to advocate for yourself, be vocal, right? You matter too, right? We're all grad students, we matter, and what you getting your needs met.
To piggyback off of what everybody said, but so I will say that I have an advisor, but I also have a mentor that I think I work more closely with because of the alignment of our research interests. But I want to say that my mentor is more hands-on than my advisee, but at the same time, they have both been equally supportive. And I say that because, again, I came into this program, I was 8 months pregnant, and my advisor, with her background, being a parent as well, she was like, this is how I want us to move so that you're not overwhelmed as you continue to adapt to being a parent and being a PhD student. And I want you to thrive in this program. So she was a little bit more hands-off, but she did a lot of checking in. My mentor was more hands-on, had a lot of projects. And I think the way that I managed it was I try to figure out what I could get from each project before I said yes or no. Because again, I wanted to say yes to a lot of things, but then I had to be realistic and tell myself that I'm still working full time and I'm a parent by myself. So I didn't want to be overwhelmed. But again, I had to be intentional with why I was saying yes or no to these projects. And again, as people, as my mentors and my advisor started out being hands-on and eventually started being hands-off, it was like, okay, well, I got the experience for this. I now know how to do this on my own. Let me take a little bit more initiative going forward so I can still feel prepared enough to do this independently once I graduate and everything as well. So I think that's my advice. Again, to be vocal. Like Andrew said, we are people too. We have to advocate for ourselves. And I think that that was very important for me, because I think in the beginning, I wanted so badly to identify as a future researcher, but I came to this program and I was like, I am a mom. And that's how I had to identify first.
Really amazing points, and like lot to learn from you. Um, so like I think yes. So in connection to that, like another question that we could pose is, we are more than just PhD students, right? Like from all the things that you have told, I think it's not just a career that you have. You have a life. You have other commitments outside school. And how did you manage, or like what is your advice to like balance between work and career and all the other things that is there that life always throws at us?
So this is a very interesting conversation or question. Again, as I'm not sure everybody here knows, but again, I am a full-time teacher. I am a mother of 2 kids. I am a part-time PhD student. And I just felt like there really is no balance. I think you have to pick a time when to prioritize each. And for example, I've told myself that I am a teacher from 8 to 3. I am a student from 4 to 7, but I'm a mom from the time I wake up until the time my kids go to sleep. So I really don't think that there is a balance. I think my attention shifts throughout the day. And that's why I think like it's important that everybody realizes that yes, we all have 24 hours in the day, but they all look very differently. And that's really it. And I will also say to just not be afraid to ask for help, or just simply say, hey, I can't do this today. This is all I can give. At least I showed up for class, or at least I turned my assignment in, or at least I was able to meet with my advisor or mentor to talk Y and Z. But to remember again that as much as we want it to, our life is not just about being in a PhD program. Because again, we are all humans, and life, as I realized, does not get easier while you're getting your PhD. It's all a journey. But yes.
So I have a concrete strategy that I've used, and that strategy has shifted in the last, because I'm now in my 5th year, so coursework is a thing of the past. For me, now research is the order of the day. But at one time, I was doing coursework and teaching simultaneously, and now that has started to shift. As long as you have an organizing structure, even just in your own head, I mean, we often advocate for active learning processes, right? We advocate for self-regulated learning. If you are active in your own balancing or organizing of your life, you already have a leg up. Because it is an impossible question. How do you balance it? Work-life balance? It doesn't exist. For me, I set, so what are my expectations for myself? What do I want to get done? And in general, when do I want to get it done by? And then however that time shakes out, if there's a day or two where something else requires my time and attention, I can allocate that. And that's easier now with just research, because when you have classes, when you're teaching and or are in classes, right, you have to be at a place for an amount of time. You're much more regimented. As you proceed through, it becomes much more fluid. And that's, I think, just a natural course of things. But as long as you have that organizing structure, again, at least in your own head, you have an idea of what you need to get done and when you need to get that done by, and you're organized in that way, I think that that's important. But as equally important is to give yourself grace in whether or not you accomplish those things. You know, some deadlines are firmer than others. We know this. But if you can at least understand that sometimes it's not going to go like clockwork, and don't get down on yourself for that. And I am preaching that to you while acknowledging that I don't do that even with myself. So it's entirely hypocritical, but that's whatever. That would be, I would say, the best advice I could give.
I'll piggyback off of what Andrew said, in that other than like very few deadlines in academia are hard deadlines. And I'm not saying like throw them to the wind, and I'm not saying like, you know, never submit one on time, but you'd be surprised, because we all get it. You know, I remember my father-in-law passed away while I was in grad school, and the crazy amount of stress, like I didn't really break down until I knew my classes were like, I was going to get an extension, and it felt so gross in that moment. But it helped me. And there's this professor who I didn't think had a soul, and apparently she did. But like, it showed me, I'm like, it's an incomplete, and I finished it, whatever. And I'm one of those, I'm a stickler for deadlines, but like life happens, right? And so, you know, you can you'd be surprised like how many things you can probably turn in late if you just reach out ahead of time and ask for it. I was shocked. I thought they'd be so like by the book. Oh, there was something else and I've lost it. Elise, did you have something? I feel like you were gonna.
I was gonna say, I can jump in and you can interrupt if it comes back to you. Yeah, I was gonna say, on the deadline front, I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is that most of these deadlines are things that you've put on yourself. I had a faculty member tell me not too long ago that if I choose not to do something I had set out to do, that doesn't mean that I quit. It just means that I chose to set it down. And I thought that that was a really important piece of advice. I'm really bad at beating myself up about not, doing everything and anything. And also, to kind of Andrew's point, none of us are masters of balance. There's a reason why everybody kind of chuckled when that question comes up, right? We don't know how to do it. We just know when we're doing it well, kind of what works, I guess. So some of the things that I would advocate for, and this is coming from, I do not have kids. I do not have a full-time job. I used to be a teacher. So all of the, love in the world to Destiny for doing all of this at the same time. I'm not pretending to know how to do that. But just kind of balancing, a relationship and my work and just being a person is, hard enough. But I think some of the things that have been important for me are finding a community, whether that's in person at your school, virtually with people from the MOTSIG or the writing group or wherever you have met people. Even during COVID, I know it was really important for me to set a time to do work with people online and, vent for a little bit and then get to work, or catch up a little bit and then get to work, whatever we needed to do. Sometimes it's healthy to talk to people that know what you're going through. I know, especially I'm lucky that my husband is also in academia, so he kind of understands what I'm going through. He's on the other side of his PhD, so he knows. But that's something that a lot of people don't understand, and it's helpful to talk to people who do. So I think community is huge, and whatever that looks like for you is whatever you need. And then having some sort of personal outlet. Again, I'm not great at keeping up with this myself, but coming off the other side of candidacy and making a renewed effort to take care of myself, I can tell you that some things that work for me are making sure I have time, with friends, with family, but also just taking time to get outside and take a walk at the beginning of the day before I get into the giant to-do list that I've set for myself, or taking a break during the day and taking a walk, or doing some yoga or whatever it is. It sounds little, but as soon as you start doing it, it makes a huge difference, or at least it does for me. And then one thing that's kind of a little bit more specific that I think sometimes people in grad school forget is that if you need accommodations for something, whether it be, some sort of long-term like chronic thing or something acute, advocate for yourself and get those in place. I personally have anxiety and have had to deal with that. And then I ended up with chronic migraines and had to deal with that. And without kind of knowing, at least, like, I hardly ever use the accommodations, but just knowing that they're there takes a lot of stress off my plate. And knowing that my professors, my advisors understand where I'm coming from on that is really helpful. So if there's any reason for you to use accommodations, don't feel like there's any shame in using them, because they're absolutely there to support you, and professors are really generally pretty great about working with you on those. So that's a little more concrete, but wanted to make sure I mentioned that as well.
And what I forgot and I remembered is pretty much aligns with what Elise said, but I'm going to tie it back to what Destini, Destini talked about, not like, she doesn't have to be a mom, right? That's part of her identity. And I think framing and thinking of that and not losing yourself in your PhD is really important, of like, I am a wife. This is something that's important to me. So when I do date night, it's not like I feel bad about it. This is part of my life, For me, leaving teaching was hard. And I kind of felt like I lost a part of myself there. So I've started tutoring, and I've been tutoring ever since. And I don't feel bad about that. Like, that to me, that's not like an hour loss where I could be doing other things. It helps me connect to like who I am. And I think framing that in that way, I wish I would have had an identity of like someone who stays in shape, but like, having those identities, and so it's not a chore, right? It's not something else you have to do. It's just who you are, and not losing yourself. I think it's really hard I think it's really hard to lose yourself. Sorry, let me try again. It's really easy to lose yourself in grad school, because I don't know if you've heard the saying, like, they'll tear you down to build you back up, like, as every whatever. But like, you see all these things going around, and it's really easy. The imposter syndrome is super real, but just figure out like what things are really important to you and who you are, and don't lose sight of who you are when you're trying to figure out who you want to be. And then therapy. I cannot, there's just such a stigma around it. I highly recommend, if you're not seeing a therapist every week, don't wait for it to become a problem. Please, please, please. If you can, and I know that sometimes in different states, it's in insurance and all that kind of stuff, please look into it and try to get on a regular therapist schedule.
Actually, one last comment on that. I think that's really great advice about therapy, and know that it can take a really long time to get in, especially if you need to go through university counseling services. I know, especially the past couple of years, my students have been on wait lists for months and months and months. And, we don't all have the ability to go outside of that free network. So especially if you are hoping to use that, definitely get in earlier and be proactive about it. It's great advice.
Also, on that note, on mental health, the questions that we could go further on is like about burnout and how to avoid it.
I would say, as far as being burned out, I think that if you're proactive in your decision making, as far as what are you doing, do you like what you're doing, I think it's less likely to occur if you like what you're doing. However, we're not always afforded that luxury. I think that we should all be very aware if we're feeling strained, and to kind of face it head on, right? Because if you essentially just tamp it down and sort of rationalize it away or deny that it's happening, I think that connects to the therapy comment that Nikki made. It will boil over, right? That the burnout effect is the boiling over of little things that pile up over a long time. So try to kind of be aware of kind of the metacognitive element of it, be aware of how you're feeling as best as you can. And then if you are feeling burned out, I'm no expert on this, but to me, being able to take that breather, like Elise is saying, like if finding something, perhaps not drastic, right? We're not saying quit grad school, but say, have something that makes you feel a little bit better, de-stresses you a little bit, maybe take a little mini vacation, or perhaps even offloading things. If you find yourself, because I know for me, the moments I've felt burned out are when I've been overscheduled. I'm in that right now. I've got a lot going on, almost too much going on. And if you come to a point where you need to say, okay, there's some things that I shouldn't be focusing on these. I need to, as Elise said, put these down. I think it would, however you said it, at least set these down. I mean, giving yourself the grace to do that, not being so hard on yourself. We are our own worst critics, right? Everyone is their own worst critic. And so giving yourself that room to breathe. That's my thought.
And let me just add, and I'm trying to think of how to say this, is that I know for me at least, and I know others, I wasn't really even sure what I wanted to do. And so grad school was an option and it worked out, but for a lot of people, it doesn't. And so I think it's important when you go into grad school, knowing that, like, I'm not saying like, just quit when it gets hard, but knowing that that is an option, and it's not quitting, it's making the decision that's best for you. And so I started with this group of this 4 little reading group, and 2 of them did not finish and 2 of us did. And the 2 that finished, it's because they found the jobs that they wanted and they didn't need to go through grad school and do all that kind of thing. Like, one works for Meta, making probably 4 times what I'll ever make. And then the other one, literally got the exact job that she wanted, and she didn't need it anymore. And it didn't make sense for them. And I think both of them did kind of struggle with that, like, oh, I'm quitting, or I couldn't do it. And it really broke my heart, because I'm like, but the end goal, you've met your goal, right? And so I think it's important to kind of think about, like, not just the process, but always have that end goal in mind of, like, what you want to do, and that may change. But the burnout, and again, that in mind, like, is the burnout happening because you're not going to reach the goal because your goals have changed? Maybe it doesn't match your goals anymore. So I just want to put that out there. And that's really hard. It's a really, really hard thing. But I kind of want to normalize it a bit, in that the world is changing, and now that things are remote and things are like, all these UX jobs are coming out and things like that are so similar. I don't know. It's just a weird thing to say, and I know it's kind of difficult, but I just want to try to normalize that as much as possible. Like, it's not a failure. It's just making the right decision for you.
I don't even know where to start. So I will say that, again, this is just me speaking on my experience, that I ended up having to take a semester off because I did have really bad postpartum depression and anxiety. And I took that as, I'm letting myself down, but then I had to reframe my thoughts, and with the help of my advisor, and realize that I was putting myself first so that I can keep moving forward without giving up on my dream of, becoming Dr. Braxton. And then when I had postpartum depression again, the second time, I was a little bit more vocal, and I had a stronger village to recognize the sign and to, like, immediately step in. So I will say, not be afraid to ask for help and be vocal, and, like, maybe have something in place. But that's just my opinion. I also will say, when it comes to putting your mental health first, to, again, not be ashamed, to say that you are in therapy. Because I just felt like if I wasn't in therapy, I don't even think I would have got this far. I was gonna say something else. Oh, another thing is, I take time to have a day where I am not doing anything PhD related, because, again, juggling so much, I'm just like, if by Monday I'm excited, and then by Wednesday I'm like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. So for me, like, I know that Fridays, I do not schedule meetings, and I'm just like, I don't schedule meetings because Monday through Thursday, my kids really only get to spend time with me after I pick them up from daycare. But Fridays, I'm just like, no, I'm not gonna, have you sit in front of your tablet, or just hurry up and make you dinner and then you go to sleep. Like, I want to enjoy my time. And I think that for me, that created less mom guilt, and just, like, freed up my time, so that, again, I don't see myself falling back into postpartum depression. But I will say, like, it's an ongoing thing, and I do think that there are certain things in place to minimize my depression, but I wouldn't say that it's completely gone. I will say that having a village with, again, my research lab is a strong part of my village. And again, I just prioritize yourself and not feel bad about it. And I say that as somebody who was excited to not take summer classes this past summer. I had all these goals and I didn't do a single goal. And I was like, this was the first summer that my oldest son, Eli, got to spend time with me and enjoy like going to the pool without me taking my computer places.
Yeah, first, I think it's awesome how open and honest this conversation is. So props to everybody for that, because I think it's so important, again, to normalize all of these things. And I want to connect back. I mean, this is the thread that's running through a lot of this too, but the idea that Andrew brought up about advocating for yourself, and kind of Destini touched on this as well with like taking a semester off. I mean, it's so important to make sure that you are saying what you need to say when you need to say it. There are times when you can't do everything that you did even the semester before. I know that my second year, my spring semester was a nightmare. I took on way too much, was doing way too many new projects, conference presentations, all of the things, all of the time. And I got completely lost in it. And then I had a conversation with my advisor kind of following that semester at the beginning of the next academic year. And she said, you don't have to do all of these conferences. If you're doing, especially AERA or APA or something like that, you don't also have to present that same work or versions of that same work elsewhere. Because I think the previous spring I had done something like 6 conference presentations or something ridiculous. That was just too much for me to manage while taking all my classes and doing all of the other things. And part of me, I think, needed to get that permission from her. But if I hadn't, asked about it first or said that I was struggling, she wouldn't have offered that. So I think it's important to, even if you don't know what the solution is yet, to tell your advisor or tell other people where you are, tell people if you need to take a step back. And then obviously a lot of us have been alluding to, community and our labs and our colleagues, do the same for them when you can, as well. I know that I took a step back while I was doing candidacy, but while other people, my other colleagues, Andrew and others included, are doing candidacy, make space for them to put other things aside during that time as well. Because it's very important that we can lean on each other. And again, even if you struggle with something like depression or anxiety or whatever the case may be, it's never completely at bay, right? It's something that you have to kind of think about in terms of taking care of yourself proactively, because you will end up there if you don't do things that are proactive for yourself. I know one of the best things for me recently, I know Andrew mentioned like taking a small vacation, even if it's literally going, somewhere on the other side of your town where you live and just staying at a cheap Airbnb somewhere and not bringing your computer. That honestly can make a difference. I have a friend who does these individual writing retreats like this, and it really helps her get away. And she's writing, not academic writing. She writes for herself and does something different just for a couple of days on her own. Things like that, I think, can make a huge difference. I know I got to study abroad last year, and just getting out on the weekend and hiking, or getting out near the water and just getting away from things was a huge factor in reducing my stress. And I highly advocate for that, and also need to be better about it myself now that I'm back home. But definitely, making space for yourself. And as Destini was saying, take full days off sometimes. Like, just refuse to look at anything. Don't bring your computer with you somewhere. I know I have a friend who just started candidacy, and my biggest piece of advice to him was to make sure that he took some full days off and some full breaks away from things, because I experienced that burnout because I didn't do that. And I wanted to make sure that he didn't do the same thing that I did, and build that into your schedule from the start, and give yourself that space, even if you're not sure if you're going to need it. Because again, if you're proactive, you'll be a better researcher, a better version of your, PhD self if you're taking care of yourself first.
Yeah, I absolutely love all the points, and uh, specifically this thing about mental health. Yes, and like insurance and things like that, and that's directly connected to another aspect of PhD, which also affects mental health, which is the funding. So, like one of the audience questions is like, uh, when to apply for these sources, like, and also some of these I mean, at least in my case, many of the funding sources that I can even think of are all for citizens, so it's not something I can apply for. But even then, let's assume that we have a someone who can apply for hypothetically apply for all funding sources. uh, when would you start applying for these, and how to know if your program is like I mean has funding, like the one that you actually apply for, or like you're already in now. How would you like think about sustaining yourself?
So I'll start just because I had a very interesting experience with funding this past year through just various things at Ohio State. I had applied for a fellowship that ultimately fell through. It turns out I was ineligible for that funding source, and I didn't know it. And so one of my faculty was very generous and worked out a GRA appointment for me to do research and get funding for the 5th year. So what I would say to anyone who's just starting out into their PhD, and I don't know where everybody who's on the call here today, where everybody's at, but I would get a hold of a person in your department's administration, like the administrative staff people. They tend to be a little bit more in the know. Some faculty know, but a lot of them don't. These are people who will know what your department is doing, because there's often the program level, there's the department level, sometimes the college level. There are funding at all different levels. At least at Ohio State there is. So trying to get a hold of somebody in each of these realms, representatives who might have something to say to you, that's a good place to start. And as far as when to do it, as soon as you're able. I mean, the sooner the better, right? You don't, these are not the sorts of things that most funding sources are not the sorts of things you want to do a month before you need you need the money to start rolling in, right? I mean, it's more like a year or so, maybe 6 months before you need the money to start coming in. You want to really look at this, but that depends on what you're looking at. Every deadline's different, but that's what I would say.
Yeah, I almost had to quit grad school because of a lack of funding. Every school is different. Some will not take on new students without having guaranteed funding. And that's and again, there's funding in the US, which is different than funding in Canada, which is different than funding in other places. So this is a tough question because there's also funding for like GRAs, and then there's dissertation funding that you can apply to so that you don't have to work doing your dissertation. I highly recommend those as if it's easy or common, to get those. But that one's tough. I mean, getting funding on your own is really tough. For me, I did not have funding my first semester and had to take out loans. And then I just applied for every single job. So my first one semester, I was the person that goes to the school and like mentors the student teachers. And then another one, I was on one research project, and then another was on another research. Like every year I did something different. And I had to apply every year and I had to interview. I ended up coming out with a whole bunch of different like methodologies and a bunch of different like reference writers because I worked on all these different projects. It was not fun. Like it's one of those, if I could have just been like, here's your money, come and, that would have been fantastic. So, I want to say that there are options out there. Sometimes it really depends on the school. Again, when you come from a small school that doesn't have a lot of faculty, there's not just probably a bunch of money just laying around in jobs. So, it's tricky. There's external stuff, but it is, it's really difficult. And that's something that you kind of have to ask yourself and look around. I didn't even know you could shop around and all this kind of stuff. I had no idea what I was doing when I went to grad school. I said, this will be fun. Joke's on me.
Yeah, I think to echo some of what's already been said, there's definitely some sources outside of just your advisor that you need to think about. In terms of, I know Andrew said, kind of looking at some of these administrative people, if your school or your college has any sort of newsletter, a lot of times postings will be there, buried deep in it, things that you didn't even know existed. And also, if you're struggling with funding, tell your advisor and see what they might know of, talk to other faculty, see what they might be aware of. Like Andrew said, sometimes faculty will have something that they haven't posted yet or something they've been thinking about. And if you happen to say you're looking for funding and they think you're a good fit, you might just get slotted into something you didn't even know about just by kind of advocating and asking around. I know also it can be really difficult at the beginning of the program. A lot of schools, or at least Ohio State, is not very good about telling you ahead of time if you have funding until after you've committed, which is more common than it should be. And I know there was a lot of frustration over that here and some other places this year because it looked like maybe there wasn't enough funding for people. And then all of a sudden, all these GRAs opened over the summer. And then a lot of people, including me, switched out of GTA positions that opened up more funding at the departmental level that people weren't aware of. So sometimes that stuff does happen throughout the summer too. So I just want to say, like, if you don't secure what you want by the end of the academic year for that next year, keep looking. A lot of stuff pops up over the summer. I applied for a couple positions very late last spring due to the same funding issue that Andrew was talking about with a fellowship, just on the proactive side, because I saw what happened with Andrew and some other people, unfortunately, and was able to secure some funding that way, and then saw several other GRA options this summer that I ended up applying for and secured one of those as well. So that does kind of happen throughout the summer. So keep on your email, keep in touch with people. They might know of things that are coming up. It's really important to just kind of be aware of. And just be aware too of deadlines. I know, especially with internal funding within departments, our GTA positions and some of the GA positions, for example, you have to turn in an application in either January or February. I'm not sure which it is. And you have to do it every single year, whether you're already in one of those positions or not. So you may have an advisor for a teaching position who would like you to continue, but if you miss that deadline of reapplying, you may not be eligible for that position again the next year. So make sure you're putting that stuff in your calendar the second that you know about it, or even if you know it's coming for the following year, give yourself a couple weeks notice or something like that in your calendar to start looking for it. Just make sure you're not missing out on those really fundamental opportunities. And I know that happens for some universities when you're applying as well. You may have to fill out such things before you even step foot in the university to be eligible for those positions. So just make sure you're very aware of deadlines in addition to kind of advocating and keeping an eye on newsletters and other emails.
I will say that listening to everybody's responses has been very helpful, because I did not know any of this stuff existed. I am still taking out student loans to cover my semesters, which is becoming harder because as this is my last semester taking classes, I won't be able to get a loan for next semester to pay for next semester. So I'm trying to figure out how to make that work. I also, again, have found it extremely hard applying for funding, because one of the requirements is that you have to be a full-time student, and I'm a part-time student. So half the time I don't meet that requirement for funding. And I know this was not a part of the question, but I will say that please take that in consideration when trying to decide if you want to be a full-time student or a part-time student, because that is one of my disadvantages as being a part-time student currently. Yes.
Okay. Also great thought. And at this point, I think we can also transition to some thoughts that Elise had to share. And I will go ahead and pause recording from here. Just a second.